Your actions were brutal, they were absolutely horrific, they were selfish, and they were completely senseless.
Scathing words from Judge Elizabeth Leonard to Armando Barron moments before she hands down his sentence for the murder of Jonathan Amerault.
He wrote a letter that was read by the victim's advocate, urging the parole board to...
Armando Barron and Brittany Barron were childhood sweethearts and got married in their teenage years. The couple shared 3 children. But as their relationship portrayed to be fairly normal, after many years it started to become rocky. Armando tended to be very violent against Brittany and often beat her in front of the kids. Unsurprisingly, due to the abuse, she started to look elsewhere for comfort and someone to confide in. September 19, 2020. Armando, who was aged 30 at the time, found messages on his wife Brittany's phone, who was 31. The messages were between Brittany and a man named Jonathan Amerault, aged 25, where the pair met at their workplace. Jonathan was a biomedical manufacturing engineer and was an avid sports fan who loved the outdoors. He had a positive and uplifting vibe when around people. When Armando was going through his wife's phone and found the messages, he saw enough evidence to make him believe the pair was having an affair. Where he then flew into a rage, beating her ruthlessly, leading him to pull out a pistol and putting it into her mouth, only to retrieve it and choke her until she passed out. Shockingly, this was all in front of their 9-year-old daughter, who witnessed the whole chaos. Finding out his wife was having an affair only made him worse. He began to devise his revenge. Armando took Brittany's phone and started to message Jonathan to lure him to a secluded park in Cheshire County. Unfortunately, Jonathan took the bait and decided to meet up. Armando persuaded Brittany to come with him after dropping the kids off to his mother, who lived in the home next door. They arrived at the park. Jonathan was quickly ambushed and punched in the face before being brutally assaulted to the ground, and Armando forced him at gunpoint to get into the back of his own car. For a few moments, Armando wandered off, leaving Brittany in the car alone with Jonathan, who pleaded Brittany to grab the machete which was left in the car and use it to save them. At this point they were both convinced they were going to die. She refused and said one hit wouldn't kill him and would lead to Armando killing them both. Shortly after, Armando returned to the car, putting his gun in her hands and wrapping his around hers whilst ordering her to shoot Jonathan. However, whilst she held the gun, she refused to move her finger to the trigger, which further enraged Armando. Ripping the gun out of her hands and takes it back and instead ordered her to cut Jonathan's wrists, which she did. Throwing him to the ground, Armando then commanded her to stand on his neck. Despite the torturous acts, he survived, sending Armando into a much deeper, sadistic rage, grabbing the machete and cutting Jonathan all over his body. Surprisingly, he survived the continued attack, where Armando grabbed his gun and shot him twice in the chest and once in the head. Extraordinarily, Jonathan was still alive and was put in the back seat of his car, whilst Brittany could hear him groan as he clung on to his life. Whilst Jonathan was slumped in the seat, the husband and wife began to pack the car with camping gear. Armando gave Brittany a pistol which she placed into her backpack. Ordered by Armando, Brittany was told to drive to a campsite they frequently visited, which was over 200 miles away. During this moment, Jonathan was moaning and bleeding out. A short while after, he sadly passed away in the back of the car as Brittany continued to drive, with Armando following closely behind in a Jeep which he borrowed from his mother's boyfriend. They stopped at a store and purchased a shovel, lighter fluid and a few other items to help dispose of the body. They continued on their journey whilst communicating on the phone the whole time. Armando told her he was sorry for making her do this. They soon arrived at the campsite and set up camp. Disturbingly, Armando ordered his wife to remove the head of her lover, and it wasn't up for discussion. She did it.
I removed Jonathan Amerault's head because I was told that that was what I had to do.
She then put the rest of the body into a tarp, which they rolled up to bury in a different location. At this point, the couple realized they needed to come up with an alibi. Armando used Jonathan's phone and texted some of his friends and family, so it appeared he was still alive. Brittany, at the same time, called her workplace notifying them she won't be in on Monday, September 21, 2020. Unsurprisingly, Jonathan didn't show up at work, which was unusual for him. No one had heard from him since that previous Saturday, which raised worry. His mother reported him missing and had a feeling something had happened as his hiking gear was still at home. From initial police checks, they found no trace of him or his car. However, after speaking to his co-workers, they mentioned they had heard rumors about his affair with Brittany, raising more suspicion as she was absent as well. Wasting no time, they set off in search for Brittany. Armando knew people would start looking for her too, so he made her message her friends, telling them that she has left to clear her head for a while. Going even further, she texted one of her friends, saying she was moving to Mexico to start over and that she wouldn't be seeing her kids again anytime soon. Her friends were adamant to find out where she was, but she didn't say. Armando headed home, leaving Brittany at the campsite. He left her with 2 guns, and one was the murder weapon, merely for protection against wildlife. He told her that she better have got rid of the body by the time he returned, on the Friday, around a week later. Brittany buried the head and wiped down Jonathan's car and burned all the belongings such as his ID and phone. September 22, 2020. Some hunters passed by Brittany's campsite and told her it was illegal to camp there. One of them notified Hampshire Fish and Game Office after having a feeling like something was off when encountering her. 2 officers arrived. It didn't take them long to notice a large tarp weighed down with stones and branches covering a car a short distance away. They also noticed marks on the ground indicating something had been dragged or pulled across, which led to a small ravine where they found the body. The officers immediately took her into custody and the body was scheduled in for autopsy. September 24, 2020. In custody, she confessed to everything, giving every detail she could think of and told them about Armando discovering her affair. She went into great detail and mentioned how he would beat her and how he killed Jonathan. Interviewers noticed her 2 black eyes, her left eye being heavily bloodshot, a chipped tooth and various cuts and bruises over her body. She was later charged with 3 counts of falsifying evidence due to the disposal of the body and destructions of Jonathan's property. September 25, 2020. Armando was driving away from his home with one of his daughters and was stopped by officers. He was quickly detained and taken into custody where they charged him with capital murder along with charges of beating his wife. As suspected, he claimed to be innocent. When Brittany appeared before the judge, her lawyer read out a passionate request for her to be released from jail and insisted that everything she did was under severe pressure after having already been beaten. And also that Armando was armed the whole time he gave orders. She had no previous record of violence and fully cooperated with the police. He went on to say how she went on to solve this case and requested she needed to be with her daughters and to be able to leave with an electronic tag. Prosecutors disagreed, stating she had multiple chances of fending off her husband, before and after the crime, such as when they was left with the machete or when the gun was in her hands. Also, the fact the entire time she had a pistol in her backpack and drove in a separate vehicle on the journey which was over 200 miles long, where she had the chance to veer off or make a phone call. Adding on to this, she had the chance to ask the hunters who came to the campsite for help. There was no attempt during the whole crime. Prosecutors went on to say she is a danger to the public and she obeys her husband no matter the severity. In the end, the judge refused her bail plea. It was clear Armando had no chance of bail. In their state, the death penalty had been revoked, meaning Armando's likely to be handed a life sentence with no chance of parole. Both were sent back to prison. Brittany continues to be involved in her children's lives through video visits. However, it is not known if they know why the pair are in prison. January 2021. Armando requested a parole hearing. He went on to say his wife had been lying about the murder this whole time. Brittany pleaded guilty to 3 counts of falsifying evidence and is currently out on parole. Barron stands charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, assault, and soliciting murder, according to the Sentinel. He also faces a number of domestic violence charges.
I regret it every day, and I know that I have to live with what I've done for the rest of my life.
Brittany Barron says she now accepts complete responsibility for her actions around the death of Jonathan Amerault, with whom she had an affair. Officials say he was shot by Barron's husband at a Ringe Park in September of 2020, and that Barron and her husband drove the body to northern New Hampshire, where she committed what the parole board calls a heinous act.
I removed Jonathan Amerault's head because I was told that that was what I had to do.
Barron's parole was vehemently opposed by Amerault's parents. They wrote a letter that was read by the victim's advocate, urging the parole board to keep Brittany in custody until after she has testified against her husband.
So if you think chances are low that someone capable of doing all that wouldn't simply just run before testifying next month, or simply go back on her word at his trial, please think again.
In granting parole, the board made it clear that Barron must fulfill her obligation to testify truthfully at her husband's trial. Brittany told the board she understands and that her actions over those days continue to haunt her.
Something that I continue to struggle with is forgiving yourself for the choices that you make and being able to own, just really accept that it happened.